As I said yesterday, this feast day of the Transfiguration, usually when we have a feast day, it kind of interrupts our daily read-in cycle and our placement. But this is a perfect placement from where we've been reading and reflecting and studying in our first readings from Exodus and Leviticus and the book of Numbers. You have to remember that the Jewish people, especially during Jesus' time, were waiting for a new Moses, a new Passover, new unleavened bread, a new Exodus. And the reason for it is as we heard in yesterday's first reading, Moses was also a flawed individual. In fact, Moses at that point in our reading from the book of Numbers where Moses was told to command water to come from the rock, but instead out of frustration and a lack of trust with the people and maybe even with God, he strikes the rock twice, disobeying God's commandments and showing his frustration and using that rod, that staff, which was meant to guide the people, and using it like almost in a way of an act of violence. And so because of that, God said, well, you too, Moses, will not see the land that I promised you. So even Moses was a flawed individual. And so from that, the people in Jesus' time were looking for someone greater than Moses. And so now in the Transfiguration event, we don't get it in Matthew's version, but in Luke's version, when Moses and Elijah appear to Jesus, what are they discussing? They're discussing Jesus' exodus. Luke goes out of his way to mention that fact. They're talking about Jesus' exodus. And so we can point out, if we remember from the story, especially from Exodus forward, what's the first thing that happens in both Exodus and in today's gospel? Moses ascends a mountain. Jesus ascends a mountain. Obviously, Moses appears, obviously in Exodus, and Moses appears in the Transfiguration account. Peter mentions about making tents, making reference to the tabernacle that we heard about a couple days ago. The construction, at least in the book of Exodus, the construction of the tabernacle that was going to house the presence of God. How does the presence of God come onto that tabernacle? Through a cloud. What happens after Peter talks about building the tents? A cloud appears and it casts a shadow over them. But notice also the difference with this. Where does the divine radiance, the divine light come from? It comes from Jesus himself, because the glory of the divinity resides within him. Jesus is not reflecting any light. He is the pure source of light. And also, where as we read in Numbers and Leviticus and Exodus, what were the people supposed to do? They were supposed to listen to Moses. But what do we hear? We hear them grumbling against Moses. What's the Father's command to Peter, James, and John, and to us? This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And so to tie all this together and to kind of put a bow, on this connection between the old covenant, the old Passover, and the new Passover. What exactly is Jesus' exodus? How is it different than Moses? And the answer to that is going to be the problem of death. Because Jesus is going to take the new Passover, the new lamb, the new exodus. He's going to conclude it with the cross. The exodus for Jesus is a movement from this life that we have, and to move forward into a life that is radiated by God's divine presence. So in Jesus' life, it's a movement from this life to the resurrected body. And we're called, we're in this wilderness stage now where we want to cling to the old way of life, just like the the Israelites wanted to cling to Egypt and to go back to Egypt and to worship the golden calf, which was considered an Egyptian god. They wanted to go back to that, and God, through Moses, was trying to lead them forward. We, with our baptisms, is like the first promise, the installment. And then capped off with our new Passover, the Eucharist. We're called to move forward and to look forward to that divine, radiant, resurrected life. But we're called, we are so accustomed to cling to the old way of life. We try to hold on to this life, a life that is wounded and afflicted by sin. And we try to seek our comforts and our consolations in this way of life. But we're called to journey forward in the new Exodus. Elsewhere in the Gospels, Jesus says, what? He who saves his life will lose it. He who loses his life will find it. This is what he's talking about here. We're called to let it go. It's not our source of consolation in life, but our rest, our eternal rest in the new Passover and the new Exodus and the promises and the inheritance of the glory of God is what awaits us. May we look forward and journey with Jesus in his new Exodus. May God bless you.